Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the sorry, I got used to it. Welcome back to the book reading series. This time we're doing Magic the Gathering War of the Spark Forsaken. So this is actually a sequel to the previous um War of the Spark book. This is book 2. I hope it stops there, but I kind of hope that it doesn't because I really enjoy the War of the Spark series. Um Ravnica is one of my favorite planes of all the planes there is, especially because well, it's home to the Izzet League, and I associate myself with the being a member of the Izzet League, because I love inventions, I love all that. Anyway, so this is gonna be the sequel to it, and if you haven't read the first book yet, and you're getting into this, I suggest that you probably do some book reading of that, or like some research of it, of the first book. It's called War of the Spark, Ravnica, and I really highly suggest it, despite the fact that people say that Greg Wiseman, the author of this series, is a terrible narrator or author. I really find that it's fine with me. It's probably not the best works of the entire Magic the Gathering book franchise. Because I've read some of the older ones, and the older ones, well, there are a few that are good, and we can probably make like a list of Magic the Gathering books that are actually, rated from 1 to 10 or something. But these later these more recent books that have been coming out are actually quite the level up from the previous ones. Although the previous ones did have like a few select really high up there, really recommended books, Alara, Shards of Alara. But anyway, so I think I've rambled on too much for this introduction. I think all of you just want to get in onto the lore. I really don't know what you guys do with these book series. Either you just read them on your own without my voice, author, audio book, whatever narration, or you guys actually do listen to them. So anyway, I guess we should just get into the fray. Epilogue. Chapter 1. Kaya. Numb. She felt numb. Maybe that was necessary right now, as she helped Arlen Cord carry off the desiccated corpse of a man she barely knew, a planeswalker named Dak Faden, who sacrificed his spark and his life to save Ravnica, to save the very multiverse from the dragon Nicol Bolas. Now Bolas was dead too. Like Faden, he had ultimately lost his spark to the Eternals he himself had created, and Kaya and all of Ravnica had watched him dissolve, disintegrate into ashes that blew away on the wind. It had been a stupendous victory, and a costly one. Kaya was certain she could feel it more, both the exaltation of triumph and the pain of the losses that earned it. Instead, as she and Arlen lowered Dak's body onto an empty wooden board between the cadavers of Domri Raid and a Viashino named Jadira, what passed for her emotions seemed... what? Shrouded? Is that it? Or was the metaphor simply suggested by the thin white sheet of spidery silk that the Golgari priestess, Makta Izani, was rapidly weaving over all three corpses? Kaya barely knew any of them. Raid had been an idiot and a turncoat. Jadira had followed him blindly, but Dak had been an actual hero, part of the team that shut down the planar bridge, stopping the flow of Eternals pouring into Ravnica from Amonkhet. From there, he could have planeswalked anywhere. Instead, he chose to return and fight the good fight. To fight, and then to die for having made that choice. If I can't feel anything for him, then who exactly is wearing that silken shroud? Cord turned around to fetch another corpse, but Kaya decided she'd had enough of that grim work. All around her, a joyous victory celebration had erupted, punctuated by mourners crying over their very personal losses. Each extreme created contrast for the other. The elven girl climbing over the wreckage of Bolus's fallen statue, and the human boy swinging from the branch of the fallen world tree Vitu Gazi seemed all the more carefree when set against the goblin mother and child desperately mourning over what remained of their husband and father, whose lower half had been crushed beneath the foot of the god eternal Bontu. A sinking sun passed between two buildings, and a sudden ray of light caused Kaya to squint, caused her eyes to water. It was the closest thing to tears she had managed since this whole thing had begun. Maybe the real monsters would come later, catch me unawares, and lay me out. She found herself hoping so. She didn't like feeling dead inside. She'd had enough of death for one lifetime, which was more than a little ironic considering her profession. Kaya was, or had been until very recently, a ghost assassin. Her magic allowed her to send spirits to a final rest. Death was quite literally her business, but until today, she'd never felt quite so dead herself. Dead and dead tired. With the battle over and the adrenaline rush receding, Kaya, the reluctant Orzhov Syndicate Guildmaster, could once again feel the full force of the thousands upon thousands of Orzhov debtor contracts that weighed down her soul. Ah, it's tempting, so tempting, to simply declare all those debts forgiven. But she knew such an act would destroy the Orzhov, and she feared that if even one guild fell, the delicate balancing act that was Ravnica would topple with it. The world city literally and magically depended on its 10 guilds operating, if not in harmony, then at least in balanced opposition to one another. And Kaya had not worked so hard to save Ravnica, only to be the cause of its downfall by a different means. So the debts would not be forgiven, and for now, at least, she would continue to carry their weight. She wanted, needed, to see a friendly face. By this time, she had many close friends on Ravnica, Ral and Tomic, Hikara, Lavinia, even Vraska, and yet the two people she felt closest to, most wanted to see, were two teenagers she had only just met this very morning. Teo and Rat. My entourage. She smiled. There. That's an emotion. Not much of one, I'll grant you, but it's something. Chase that. She started moving through the crowd with a purpose, trying to find the young shield mage and the even younger thief. Not that Kaya was all that old. She wasn't even 30 years old herself. But, relative to those two, she felt like one of the ancients of Keru. Why was she so attached to them? How had it happened so quickly? Alright, sure, each had saved her life today, multiple times, but during this War of the Spark, as folks had already dubbed it, her life had been saved by 2 or 3 dozen different individuals, and she herself had saved easily 3 times that number, whatever that number might be. No, it was more than that, she felt sure. It's their purity. What they have is what I'm missing. Teo was so naive, but there was a hidden strength beneath that naivete, a strength he had only barely discovered and still didn't truly believe he had. And Rat, a Raethia rat shocked as life, had been impossible, truly impossible. It was a miracle she had survived it, yet the true miracle was that she hadn't simply survived it, she had embraced it and had maintained an optimism that was even more impossible. They were two pure souls. Relative to them, Kaya felt a bit like a vampire, a creature of darkness desperate to feed off their bright light. That thought scared her a bit, and she literally stopped in her tracks. But she took a deep breath. It's a metaphor, Kaya. You're not actually taking anything from either of them. In fact, there are gifts you can give them. Things that might make them happy, or at least make their lives a bit easier, before you say goodbye. Buoyed by that, she started forward again, and soon spotted them together. Well, of course, they were together. The 16-year-old rat had adopted the 19-year-old Teo the moment he had arrived on Ravnica. As she approached the two kids, Teo spotted her and said to Rat, "Don't forget, you still have the two of us." Kaya immediately knew what they'd been discussing, as Rat nodded sadly and said, "Except you're both planeswalkers. You'll leave Ravnica eventually." Kaya wasn't sure she could leave Ravnica. She'd been told that all those Orzhov contracts had bound her to the plane. But if she did... She said nothing for now, still weighing her options. She linked arms with them both and walked on. With their entourage quite literally in tow, she joined a group of planeswalkers and Ravnicans, most of them friends of hers, or at least comrades in arms, just to be around people. They were debating something. She couldn't focus on what, and honestly didn't much care. The angel Aurelia approached. She was carrying something with an almost devout air that brought Kaya back into the moment. At first, she couldn't tell what the thing was. Then she saw it was a man's breastplate, charred and blackened. She didn't immediately grasp its significance. Each of the 10 guilds had so many rituals and traditions. She barely understood all of the Orzhov's traditions, and she was theoretically their leader. Maybe Aurelia's Boros Legion worshipped this holy piece of armor and trotted it out after every victory. Then Chandra Nalar said, "We should bury that on Theros. I think kids would like that." And Kaya knew. This breastplate was all that remained of Gideon Jura, a planeswalker who had given his life to save Ravnica and the multiverse. If anyone had been a hero of this War of the Spark, it had been Gideon. Ajani Goldmane, the Leonin planeswalker, responded to Chandra. "What he'd like is to know it's not over." "It's not over?" Teo asked, horrified. Ajani chuckled and placed a reassuring paw on Teo's shoulder. "I do believe that the threat of Nicol Bolas has passed, but we cannot pretend Bolas will be the last threat to face the multiverse. If we truly wish to honor our friend Gideon, we need to confirm that the next time a threat arises, the Gatewatch will be there." The Gatewatch? She'd never heard of it before today, and yet it seemed that this group, this team of half a dozen or so planeswalkers, had been protecting the multiverse for months, from Bolas and multiple other threats as well. They had led the charge today, and they had suffered for it. They had known what was coming, and they had come to face it anyway. And if they hadn't come, there was no way anyone on Ravnica would have survived. Of that, Kaya was quite sure. Goldbane, another member of the Gatewatch, was saying, "We just need to renew our oaths." Jace Bellerin, the Gatewatch's de facto leader, less de facto now with Gideon dead, replied, "Ajani, we all renewed them earlier today. Don't you think once a day is plenty?" Ajani scowled. His grip on Teo's shoulder involuntarily tightened, causing the kid to wince slightly. Kaya reached over and delicately removed the paw. Teo breathed a small sigh of relief, and Rat giggled. Perhaps I could take the oath." "Who said that?" Everyone had turned to look at Kaya. Holy ancients, I think it was me. Chandra looked at her hopefully and said, "Really? Ra looked at her dubiously and said, "Really?" Kaya looked inward and asked herself, "Really?" Well, yeah. She felt it. She felt something. A desire to be a part of something larger than herself. To prove herself she wasn't just a thief and an assassin, or even just a woefully unprepared guildmaster. She could be someone that the multiverse called on when there was trouble. She could be Gatewatch. She liked that feeling and decided to run with it. Assuming they'll have me. I'm not a perfect person. Trust me, none of us are, Jace interjected. Vraska snorted. Kaya ignored them both. I've been an assassin and a thief. I've had my own moral code, but the first tenet of it was always, watch your own ass. I have the ability to ghost my way through life, to allow nothing to touch me. That's the literal truth of my powers, but it somehow became my emotional truth as well. But my time on Ravnica as assassin thief, reluctant guildmaster, and perhaps even more reluctant warrior hasn't left me unaffected. Fighting beside you people has been an honor. The scariest, and yet the best thing I've ever done with my somewhat bizarre life. What the Gatewatch has done here today. She glanced down at the armor in Aurelia's hands. What you sacrificed here today, well, this will sound corny, but it has been truly inspirational. If you'll have me, I'd like to be a part of this. I'd like you all to know that if there's trouble, you can summon me, and I will stand beside you. We'd like that, Chandra said. Aye, girl, said Ajani, grinning his leonine grin. The remaining members of the Gatewatch, Jace, Teferi, and Nissa Ravain all smiled and nodded their assent. So Kaya took a deep breath and raised her right hand to take the oath. Perhaps as a symbol of what she had to offer, she turned that hand spectral, so that it became transparent, flowing with a soft violet light. Then she thought about what she should say. She had heard the Gatewatch's 6 members, Gideon included, give their own oaths earlier that day, when victory over the dragon was far from assured. Each one had said something different, but there had been a consistent theme. She said, I have crossed the multiverse, helping the dead. Move on, in service of the living. But what I've witnessed here on Ravnica, these last few months, these last few hours, has changed everything I thought I knew. Never again. For the living and the dead, I will keep watch. There. That didn't sound too bad. Feeling kind of proud of herself, she turned and smiled at Teo and Rat. Rat grinned back, but Teo was distracted by the descent of a dragon. Not Bolus, of course. It was Niv Mizzet, the Firemind, newly resurrected as the living guild pack, the literal embodiment of the mystic treaty that bound Ravnica's 10 guilds together. He and Jace, the former guild pack, exchanged a few words about the transfer of power. But Kaya paid little attention. She was watching the elf Nissa Ravain, who leaned her head over one of the many cracks in the plaza's pavement. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. From between the battle-broken cobbles, a seed sprouted and rapidly grew into a plant with large green leaves. Nissa nodded to Chandra, who somehow instinctively knew what the elf wanted her to do. The pyromancer carefully plucked 3 of the bigger leaves from the plant. Then everyone watched as the 2 women and Aurelia lovingly wrapped Gideon's armor in the leaves. Aurelia handed the armor to Chandra, who, flanked by Jace and Nissa, led a solemn procession toward the celebrating and mourning crowd. A forlorn Aurelia watched them go, but did not follow, while most of the planeswalkers did. Kaya started to follow, but Raul touched her on the shoulder and gestured with his eyes for her to wait. Tomek did the same to Vraska, who nodded and called out to Jace that she would catch up to him. With Teo and Rat beside her, Kaya soon realized that she was standing amid a not quite impromptu convocation of representatives from all 10 guilds, a realization immediately confirmed by the Firemind. As the new Living Guild Pact, I have consulted with representatives of every guild. Kaya couldn't help noticing that she had not been consulted, though she was, more or less against her will, the current Orzhov Guildmaster. She raised an eyebrow at her aide-de-camp, Tomek, who nodded. She wondered if he had been consulted, or if Niv had gone directly to Tomek's former boss, Teysa Karlov, who had her own designs on the Syndicate. Niv continued, "We have agreed that certain individuals, those who collaborated with Nicol Bolas, must be punished." Vraska, the Gorgon queen of the Golgari swarm, bristled at that, her eyes brightening with magic. "I won't be judged by the likes of you." Lavinia, acting head of the Azorius Senate, spoke sternly, but without threat. "You have been judged, and your actions on this day have mitigated that judgment." Ral, the new Azetli Guildmaster, stepped up, employing a conciliatory tone that was fairly out of character for him. "You're not the only one Bolas misled and used. Kaya and I shared that particular guilt. We may have realized our error sooner than you did, but we have no desire to quibble with an ally. Not with an ally willing to prove her allegiance to Ravnica and her own guild." Vraska looked no less suspicious, no less on guard, but her eyes ceased to glow. "I'm listening." Aurelia, the Boros Legion Guildmaster, said, "Hundreds, maybe thousands of sentient beings died on Ravnica today. Such acts of terror must not go unpunished. There are 3 who did everything in their power to aid and abet the dragon: Tezzeret, Dovin Baan, and Liliana Vess." Teo said, "But didn't Liliana—" Vorel, the Simic Combine Biomancer, interrupted him. "Vess changed sides too late, only after being the direct cause of most of the carnage." "All 3 are planeswalkers," stated Lazov, Guildmaster of House Demir. "They are out of our reach, but not out of yours." I didn't like where this was heading. "What exactly are you asking?" The Firemind brought the point home. "Ral Zarek has already agreed to hunt Tezzeret. Vraska, as penance for past sins, we assign you Dovin Baan. And Kaya, the 10 guilds wish to hire you to assassinate Liliana Vess."